attention, Mr. President. We have to wake up. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Delaware.
Mr. President, I come to the floor once again to talk about jobs and economic growth. We are continuing to see signs of a steadily improving economy, with more than 200,000 jobs created last month in the jobs report just released last Friday. And of those, 19,000 were new manufacturing jobs. We've had 43 straight months of private sector job growth, but the employment rate remains stubbornly high, and sadly, particularly for those who are long-term unemployed. Earlier today, the conference committee, the Budget Conference Committee, met, and we heard from CBO Director, Congressional Budget Office Director, Dr. Elmendorf. And he let us know that in his view, the uncertainty, the lack of clarity about the path forward for all of us here for the solutions we need for the budget and for the deficit is one of the greatest drags on job creation and on competitiveness for our country and our economy. In our Budget Conference Committee, we need to come together and reach a balanced budget deal that repeals sequester and allows the Appropriations Committee, ably led by Chairman Mikulski, to move forward with an omnibus appropriations bill for this fiscal year. We cannot afford, in my view, another long-term continuing resolution at the current sequester levels. As we heard today from Dr. Elmendorf and as we've heard from other sources, the sequester will have killed 750,000 jobs by the end of the year, and next year these ongoing, steady, grinding cuts could kill another 800,000. These are jobs. These are investments by the federal government that could be helping the private sector create jobs in repairing our crumbling infrastructure. In Delaware alone, we have 175 deficient bridges being neglected. These are jobs that help families to put food on the table. In Kent County, Delaware, where Dover Air Force Base is, sequester has hurt those who serve our nation, who operate the base and who serve our country valiantly. These are jobs that could be going to help research a cure for cancer. NIH supported more than 500 jobs in Delaware in 2011, and now cuts are costing those jobs and setting us back in the fight to find a cure for cancer and many other diseases. Sequester has been devastating to Delaware and the whole nation, and we need to replace it with a smarter, more balanced set of spending reforms that maintain investments that will allow our country to be competitive. In particular, Mr. President, if I might, we need to refocus on jobs by investing in infrastructure and focusing on manufacturing. In my view, the 19,000 jobs in the manufacturing sector that we just learned were created in the last month were a promising development, but far from as many as we should be filling. Why? Because manufacturing jobs are high-quality jobs. They pay more in wages and benefits. They help create secondary local service jobs. They contribute more to the local economy. And manufacturers invest more in private R&D than any other sector in our economy. As you know, Mr. President, before I came to serve here in the Senate, before my service in county government, I spent 8 years for a manufacturing company in Delaware. And at one point, I was part of a large site location team that went around the country to try and decide where to build a new state-of-the-art semiconductor chip packaging manufacturing plant. To make a long story short, in the end, we decided on a location where there was a skilled and reliable workforce, a responsive government that invested in the local infrastructure, and certainly we considered other factors, tax rates and incentives offered by the state and local government. But really, the skill of the workforce and the quality of the infrastructure were absolutely essential to the decision we made, surprising decision in terms of where we ultimately located. We invested, we were able to get up and running a state-of-the-art plant in a record amount of time and to contribute significantly to local employment and the local tax base. This taught me a lot about the importance of infrastructure and workplace skills. If I could mention just two things, the World Economic Forum has recently ranked the United States 25th overall in infrastructure, a key drag on our competitiveness. The American Society of Civil Engineers says we're falling behind by $250 billion a year in deferred maintenance, in investments not made by federal, state, and local governments. In my view, the case for infrastructure investment is a no-brainer. This is exactly the sort of thing that we should be doing and that the sequester is preventing us from doing, making wise, timely, and needed investments in improving our infrastructure. Another critical foundation for growth, as we saw, was a skilled and adaptable workforce. We can be the world's manufacturing leader again, but not without investing in workforce skills and in workforce training. There are many programs that can help make this possible. One I like to point to is the federal, state, and local partnership called the Manufacturing Extension Partnership that helps make it possible for university-based researchers to partner with local manufacturers to deliver skills training that keeps them at the cutting edge, that makes them more productive. In today's modern manufacturing workplace, there are fewer people, but they are more productive because of their skills. Back in August, I visited a new facility, the ILC Grayling Plastics Manufacturing Plant in Seaford, Delaware, which is a great example of what it will take for America's manufacturing resurgence to continue and to grow. This plant's already brought more than 100 jobs to Sussex County, Delaware. And these aren't the manufacturing jobs of the past. The men and women who work on this line need to be able to collaborate and communicate, to do advanced math and quality control work, and to oversee high-tech machinery and have an intimate understanding of the process that they're working with. In the end, this company looks forward to growing, to probably doubling the number of jobs in this facility in Sussex County. And to me, in an even more exciting development, these are jobs that had left the United States to go south to a lower-wage country and that have been brought back from Juarez, Mexico, to Seaford, Delaware, where there are now Delawareans employed in this newly expanded manufacturing facility. Let me conclude, if I might, Mr. President, by simply saying that here in Congress, we have the opportunity, if we work together across the aisle, to find a pathway towards making these investments in the skills of our workforce, in the infrastructure of our country that will help grow our economy and help create good manufacturing jobs today and tomorrow. One of the core challenges we face in the Budget Conference Committee is to find a path forward that will respond to the call that I hear up and down the state of Delaware, and I presume my colleagues hear from their home states, that we should make principled compromises that allow us to invest again, to replace the sequester with a more responsible and balanced package of revenue and cuts that allow us to return to investing in the skills and infrastructure necessary to grow our economy. Thank you, and with that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Wyoming is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it has now been more than 6 weeks since the Obama administration launched its health insurance marketplace. This afternoon, the Obama administration finally confirmed how few people have been able to select insurance through the exchange. According to the White House, only 106,105 people have selected coverage since October 1st. Now, this doesn't mean people actually bought their coverage. It just means they selected a plan. Now, for most of these, it was through the state-based exchanges. So people may be wondering how the Washington-run exchange did. Only 26,794 people selected a plan through healthcare.gov. Safe to say, if this was a commercial website, the plug would have been pulled by now. They came, they saw, they didn't buy it. Low expectations met with even lower reality. The numbers paint a bleak picture of the confidence that the American people have in the health care law and the faulty website created to sell it. The administration's goal was for 500,000 people, 500,000 Americans, to sign up in the month of October. The month of October alone. Instead, we now know that only a little over 100,000 people have actually signed up. The reason the numbers are so low and so disappointing is that the website is totally broken, and the American people are discovering that the coverage offered on the exchange often costs them more than they can afford and more than they were previously paying. So far, the Obamacare exchanges have only succeeded at crashing people's computers or lightening their wallets. And to make matters worse, for every one person who has selected an Obamacare plan, either from the state or the federal exchanges, 40 people have received cancellation notices. This isn't what the President repeatedly promised, and it's not what the American people deserve. Mr. President, enough is enough. It's time to give Americans what they wanted all along: access to quality, affordable health care. It's time to stop this train wreck and ease the damage being done by this terrible law. Now, to help make that happen, Senator Graham and I will soon introduce a bill that lets states opt out of some of the health care law's most burdensome provisions. Under the State Health Care Choice Act, states could opt out of the individual mandate that requires people to buy government-approved health insurance or face a tax penalty. They could opt out of the employer mandate that will force businesses to provide government-approved health insurance or pay penalties. Under our bill, states could also opt out of the health care law's benefits mandates. These are the requirements that health insurance plans provide numerous expensive services that many people may not want, may not need, will never use, can't afford, and do not want to pay for. The Obama administration has already issued hundreds of waivers to businesses, and it has delayed the employer mandate by a year. States should have the same opportunity to give relief to their citizens. Now, we know the numbers coming out of Wyoming. In Wyoming, we see that over 3,000 people have received cancellation notices, yet only 85 people have been able to select a plan. I was at the Target store in Casper this Saturday. A former patient came up to me, somebody that I had operated on. He told me that he had received a cancellation notice. He's a small businessman. He works hard for himself and for his family, and the insurance that he had worked for him was something he could afford. And what he told me is he now has to pay a higher premium and also more out-of-pocket cost in terms of a higher copay and higher deductibles, and he's frankly just not sure what he's going to do. The people I talk to tell me about all of the mandates, the higher costs, the bad side effects of the president's health care law, and they tell me that this is not what they wanted in health care reform. Got a letter from one woman from Newcastle, Wyoming, and she told me that she's losing her insurance plan also. The reason she's losing it is it doesn't meet the president's requirements that she have maternity coverage. As she points out, she doesn't need maternity care, she said, because she's had a hysterectomy. And she doesn't like Washington telling her that she has to pay twice as much to get a plan that covers it, something doesn't want, will never use, doesn't need, can't afford. When it comes to health care and health care coverage, one size does not fit all. States should be free to help the citizens of those states to get the care they need from a doctor they choose at lower costs. A lot of people in this country don't want all these new mandates, all the burdens, and the higher costs. All they actually wanted was President Obama to keep the promises, to allow them to have what the president promised them, that they could keep the insurance and the doctor that they already had. After all, that's what the president said. So we have millions of people getting letters from their insurance company canceling their insurance plans, and as of today, I know that number is over 4.2 million. So over 42 people canceled for every one that actually got insurance through the exchange. And the reason, one of the reasons for all of the insurance plans being canceled, in spite of what the president told repeatedly the American people, is something called the grandfather regulation that the Obama administration actually wrote. The president's own people wrote the regulation so that people can't keep the insurance that they want in spite of the president's repeated promises. This was a rule that the Obama administration wrote to force more people off of the insurance plans that they had before the law was passed and force them into new Washington-approved plans. Well, 3 years ago, Republicans saw that this regulation was going to lead directly to the millions of cancellation letters that have now gone out across the country. So my colleague from Wyoming, Senator Enzi, took the lead and he took to the Senate floor to try to stop this destructive rule from the Obama administration. He introduced a bill that would immediately overturn the administration's restrictive regulations about people keeping their plans. Senator Enzi pointed out back then, 3 years ago, that the administration's rule would have caused millions of people to lose their insurance they had and that they liked, and he was right, and the Washington Democrats here on the floor of the United States Senate didn't seem to care. Every Democrat member of this body, every Democrat in the United States Senate voted to make sure that the restrictive regulations stayed on the books. And because of that vote, now we have over 4 million Americans looking for new insurance plans that satisfy Obama administration mandates, but they've lost their insurance in spite of the President's repeated promises that if they like what they have, they could keep it. Many of them, like my friend and former patient who I ran into this past weekend in Casper, many of them are learning that their copays and their deductibles will be much higher than the plans that they have lost. Once they get those plans, many of them are going to find out that their costs have increased, but not just that, their choice of doctors has shrunk as well. They may not be able to go to their family doctor because he or she won't be covered by their new plan anymore. Now, last week, President Obama finally admitted that he and his administration weren't, as he said, as clear as we needed to be. Not as clear as he needed to be? That is what the President regrets, that he wasn't as clear as he needed to be? Millions of people who are losing their doctors, they don't want an apology. They don't want a new government handout. What they want is what they had before this law came into effect. They want President Obama to live up to his promise and to allow them to keep the coverage that they had and they liked and that worked for them. Even former President Bill Clinton has called for a change. Remember, the Obama administration has called President Clinton the so-called Secretary of Explaining Stuff. They had him traveling the country trying to convince people that their health care law was going to work out well for everybody. Well, now it looks like he's trying to explain to President Obama how badly the President's own health care law has hurt Americans who are losing access to their insurance plans and to their doctors. Bill Clinton said it just the other day. He said, quote, "Even if it takes a change to the law, the President should honor the commitment the federal government made to those people and let them keep what they got." Well, that's exactly right. Not only should President Obama take steps to keep his promise to the American people, he should support Republicans who want to help all Americans who are being harmed by the President and the Democrats' terrible health care law. Today's enrollment numbers show what a disaster that law has been, and the President should support the State Health Care Choice Act so that states can serve their citizens and opt out of this terrible law. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
John Sander. The Obama administration released the enrollment numbers for the health care insurance marketplace this afternoon, Politico writing that only 106,185 people have signed up for health insurance plans through the Obamacare exchanges as of November 2nd. 1/4 of those people came through the healthcare.gov website, which is operating in 36 states. The rest came through the state exchanges, and those figures included people who have selected a health plan whether or not they have actually paid for it. House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Dave Camp released a statement about the numbers, saying in part, Americans deserve access to quality, affordable health care, but this law isn't providing that. Even if this data was an accurate picture, the administration would need to enroll 68,000 people per day to meet their year-end goal. That from Congressman Dave Camp. Here in the Senate, the pending business is whether or not to move forward with legislation dealing with compounding pharmacies and whether the FDA has oversight of the pharmacies. Compounding pharmacies mix drug ingredients to create medications for individual patients. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid spoke on the Senate floor today about that pharmacy bill, and Republican leader Mitch McConnell talked about the House bill expected to come up later this week that would allow people to keep their health insurance even if it does not meet the minimum requirements in health care law. Here are the leaders as we wait for a senator to speak.
I want, before my esteemed senior senator from Vermont leaves the floor, just say a word. I so appreciate your guidance and leadership over these many years of leading the Judiciary Committee. It's a committee where most all the legislation is funneled, and what we focused on in recent months is the problem we have with judges. Appreciate your leadership. Yesterday you did a remarkably good job in leading a press event indicating the issues that we have with the D.C. Circuit, and I so appreciate your leadership in this issue and all the other issues the Judiciary Committee works on. It's too bad that we can't have the Judiciary Committee as it was in our earlier years in the Senate, where the productivity of that committee is not thwarted by not being able to bring things to the floor. The wide-ranging jurisdiction of the Judiciary Committee is so important to our country. Issues dealing with things going on with our national security agencies, cybersecurity, just the multitude of issues the committee deals with. And I wish that we could be doing more legislation here on the floor that comes from that committee. So I want to extend my appreciation to the presiding officer for the good work that is done, and certainly the accolades that I want to send to the people of Vermont for having this good man leading the Senate in many ways, not the least of which is being the presiding officer of the Senate today as the President Pro Tem. Mr. President, the symptoms of fungal meningitis can be very subtle at first. Headache, fever, and even light can start bothering you, and neck aches, back aches. But the disease can also cause strokes, seizures, and even comas. This condition, fungal meningitis, led to the death of at least 64 unfortunate Americans who were exposed to fungal meningitis when they were injected with contaminated medicine. The medicine, a steroid injection used to heal back pain, was tainted by unsanitary conditions at a facility that was masquerading as a compounding pharmacy in Massachusetts. True compounding pharmacies provide custom-made medications for patients with unique health needs that cannot be treated by off-the-shelf prescription medicines. This practice is essential and can be critical for children, cancer patients, and people with severe allergies. But contaminated medicine mixed at the New England Compounding Center was sent to scores of medical facilities in 23 different states, and was given to 14,000 patients. As I've indicated, 64 of them died, and hundreds of them were made very, very seriously ill. And, Mr. President, recently, heart medication mixed at this same pharmacy was linked to the death of 2 young Nevada boys aged 4 and 6, according to a lawsuit filed by their parents. New England Compounding Center was skirting federal regulation and manufacturing large batches of drugs for mass distribution in very, very unsanitary conditions. By avoiding the safety inspections required of large-scale drug manufacturers, companies like this can boost profits, but in the process they risk lives. The legislation on the floor will end that dangerous practice and ensure that patients have access to high-quality, custom medications. Mr. President, this is not a contentious issue. On the contrary, this legislation enjoys broad, bipartisan support, led by Senators Harkin and Alexander. It would pass by a wide margin in mere moments, not for stall tactics of a few Republican senators. Yet this bill has already been delayed for more than a month because of these tactics, and Republicans continue to insist that we run out the clock on this matter. Just so everyone knows, if all the time is required on the procedural issues, we will not be able to finish the bill until this Sunday. That is working Saturday, and the final 30 hours wouldn't run out until sometime on Sunday. It's time to dispense with this non-controversial measure, this life-saving measure. It will safeguard the lives of Americans, vulnerable Americans, people with back pain and other maladies, and move on to other important legislative priorities.
Mr. President.
The Republican leader.
One of the favorite pastimes of politicians in Washington is to talk about how frustrated the American people are with politicians in Washington. After the past few weeks, it's easy to see why. I'm talking about the President's promise, repeated dozens of times, that if you like your health care plan, you can keep it. And the sobering realization by literally millions of Americans that it just wasn't true. Some of the top fact checkers in the country have used terms like pants on fire and false and Pinocchios to describe the claim that under Obamacare folks would be able to keep their plans. In a matter of weeks, it's gone from being one of the law's top selling points to a national punchline. And if millions of people weren't so frustrated and upset by it, it might actually be funny. But it's not the least bit funny. At this stage, about 50,000 folks are believed to have signed up for insurance on the federal exchange, way, way below administration estimates. That's 50,000 who've signed up for insurance on the exchange, while 3.5 million Americans have lost their health care coverage. In other words, about twice as many folks have lost their insurance in the state of Idaho alone since October 1st as have obtained health insurance across the entire federal exchange all across America. So this is a real crisis. In my home state of Kentucky, over 250,000 people have lost their private health care plans so far, and only about 7,000 Kentuckians have been able to obtain new private insurance under Obamacare. If you consider that Kentucky received $250 million in taxpayer funds to get Obamacare up and running, the state of Kentucky got $250 million in taxpayer funds to get Obamacare up and running. That works out to about $35,000 per private insurance enrollee. $35,000 per private insurance enrollee. And that's before the taxpayer subsidies kick in. So we've thrown literally untold millions at this disastrous rollout. And what do we have to show for it? Millions of people losing their coverage, despite assurances from the President they'd be able to keep it. He said they'd be able to keep it, period. That's what the President said. So let's be very clear about something. These insurance cancellations are not any kind of an accident. This is no accident. It's the way the law was designed. Remember, in order for Obamacare to work, millions of Americans had to lose the coverage they had purchased on their own so the government could dump them into the Obamacare exchanges. That way, the government could then get them to pay more to subsidize coverage for everybody else. That's the way this thing was designed to work. The 31-year-old dentist from Louisville I mentioned last week, the one who isn't married and has no kids, but now has to carry pediatric dental care on his plan, well, he's one of the unfortunate ones who's now subsidizing care for everybody else. And despite the fact that the President and the other supporters of the bill vowed up and down that folks like this would be able to keep the health care plans they had and liked, the fact is that was never true. It was never true, and they knew it. They knew folks would lose their coverage. They knew it all along. Just as the President once famously predicted that utility rates would necessarily skyrocket as a result of his cap-and-trade policy, so too would health care rates skyrocket under Obamacare. The only difference is that on health care, Democrats apparently knew they couldn't tell people how it would all shake out in the end. But they knew. That's why in 2010, every Democrat who was in the Senate voted against a Republican proposal designed to hold the President to his word. Back in 2010, every Democrat in the Senate voted against a proposal to hold the President to his word. The fact is, the President's health care law was designed to capture millions of middle-class Americans, jack up their premiums, and use the extra cash to keep Obamacare afloat. This isn't some unforeseen consequence of the law. It is the law. It's working just like they designed it, just like what they voted for. So it's hard to take seriously this faux outrage we've seen of late from some of our Democratic friends. And as for the President, well, this should be no great revelation to him either. Just the other day, the media pointed out that the administration knew for years, that Americans would lose coverage. But there's something else. At a bipartisan health care summit in 2010, the President was asked directly about this kind of thing by House Majority Leader Cantor. In reply, the President admitted that 8 to 10 million would have to change coverage, and then justified it on grounds that they'd be getting better coverage from the government once they lost it. So the President actually admitted during that event that millions would lose their health care, and still went out on the campaign trail claiming Americans could keep the health care plans they had. This is why Americans feel so hurt by this particular broken promise. And what many of them want to know is this: why would Washington Democrats persist with it even after it became clear it was false? I think the reasons are simple enough. One, they needed to pass the Obamacare bill. And two, they needed to sell it to a skeptical public. And neither would have been possible without it. If the President had gone out and told people that if he likes your plan, you can keep it, if the President had said if he likes your plan, you can keep it, it would have never passed. And that's why the President's so-called apology of the night rang so hollow for so many. Obamacare's problems run so deep and the broken promises are so pervasive that it's impossible to identify an easy fix. It truly ought to be repealed or delayed. But if the President is sorry for breaking his promise to the American people, there is a natural place to start. He could support legislation that would help restore the plans for the folks who want them back. And he could act on it as early as this Friday. That's because the House is expected to send over a bill that would allow Americans to keep the plans they have and want to keep. There's no reason the President and Senate Democrats should not join Republicans and the American people in supporting it. This doesn't have to be a partisan battle. These cancellations haven't discriminated based on party. The people out there who are frustrated and upset at losing their health care plans are Democrats and Republicans. The President can help all of them by backing the bill the House is expected to pass on Friday. I think that's basically what President Clinton was suggesting yesterday when he said the President should honor the commitment the government made to these folks, even, said Bill Clinton, if it means changing the law. I've had a lot of disagreements with President Clinton over the years, but at key moments he was willing to cross party lines, and I think here's a moment where the American people are expecting President Obama to do the same. Allowing Americans to keep their health plans is a promise Democrats made over and over and over again. Whether or not they meant it, Democrats promised this to the American people, and it's their duty to make good on what they said. Once the House acts, my conference will be watching closely to see whether the Senate Democratic majority allows a vote and will help us send a bill to the President's desk. The American people will be watching closely as well. So my message to the President is simple. Mr. President, our constituents are frustrated and they're upset. You could help. Do the right thing. And briefly on another matter, Ford Motor Company has a proud 100-year history of manufacturing in Kentucky. Today, the company announces a new model to be constructed in its Louisville assembly plant, further employing yet another generation of Kentuckians. I'd like to congratulate Ford on this development and applaud its continued excellence in manufacturing in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
The House is scheduled to debate and vote on the bill that Senator McConnell was talking about, dubbed the Keep Your Health Plan Act, later this week. Politico writes that Democrats are on the verge of abandoning President Obama on vital elements of his signature health care law at a time when his poll numbers have been sliding, with 3 years left to go in his second term. House Democrats used a closed-door meeting Wednesday to hammer the White House on the Obamacare rollout.
Without objection.
And ask for unanimous consent also to speak for up to 10 minutes as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you. Earlier this afternoon, Mr. President, I appeared with Senator Blunt, my Republican friend from Missouri, in front of Senator Rockefeller's Commerce Committee to talk about our bipartisan legislation with manufacturing hubs that would promote new technologies to make our country a leader in advanced manufacturing. Let me illustrate by this, Mr. President. Along the Ohio Turnpike, from Toledo to Lorain to Cleveland to sort of Akron to Youngstown, much of the auto industry grew up along that turnpike, from glass that would go for windshields in Toledo, for steel in Lorain and Cleveland, for the fenders and the hoods and much of the car, to rubber in Akron for tires, the world's leading tire manufacturer, to assembly all along in Youngstown, where today the Chevy Cruze is made. If you're on the Ohio Turnpike, you see this huge plant that big letters Chevy Cruze, and just if you've not been in an auto plant or you're not from Ohio and you may not have seen one, just the expansiveness of this plant is pretty remarkable. And autos were assembled all along the turnpike. But, Mr. President, the reason this matters, in addition to why it matters in the presiding officer's state of Connecticut and other places, is not just that the auto industry and the supply chain create jobs, but what happens when an industry sort of locates with a critical mass in a community. Because Toledo, Ohio had, with the auto industry, had huge glass manufacturing, the University of Toledo had scientists that worked in material science and in glass manufacturing. Today, as a result, while we don't make quite as much glass in Toledo as we did for autos, today Toledo is one of the top 2 or 3 largest centers for solar energy manufacturing. Or go to Akron, which used to be the center of the world for tire manufacturing. Not so much of that now, although Goodyear still, corporate headquarters is still there, and there's a lot of research. But now, again, in partnership with the University of Akron, and the scientists that were processing and researching and innovating in rubber and tires,
Now polymer development and manufacture, Akron is one of the leaders in the world, in the country and in the world. So what this means, the lesson we learned from this is what Senator Blunt and I are talking about. We know in Ohio and Missouri that manufacturing is a ticket to the middle class. We also know that for too long, Washington made choices that biased finance over manufacturing, left manufacturing behind. Bad trade deals, failure to enforce trade laws, taxes that didn't work for manufacturing, and a kind of backing off focus on innovation and technology. So we've seen communities like Lordstown and Cleveland and Dayton live with the consequences. And between 2000 and 2010, 60,000 plants closed in this country, 5 million manufacturing jobs were lost. Since the auto rescue, and the more aggressive trade enforcement from President Obama. While I don't agree with some of his trade policies, he's been more aggressive on trade enforcement through the Commerce Department and through the International Trading Commission than International Trade Commission than any of his predecessors in either party. So since 2010, we've seen a beginning of growth coming back in manufacturing, not nearly making up anything close to the 5 million jobs lost or the 60,000 plants closed. But the importance of manufacturing, not just because it's in my state, and my state's number 3 in the country in production, in manufacturing, only Texas, twice our population, and California, 3 times our population, make more than we do. But the importance of manufacturing is the multiplier effect more than any other industry in our country. Manufacturing, for every dollar spent in manufacturing, $1.48 added to the economy. We know what that means in the auto supply chain, or in the wind turbine supply chain, or in the chemical supply chain, or anything that we manufacture in this country. Now, but what's holding us back is this, we never consciously follow this, but this sort of innovate here, make it there syndrome, where we still have the best scientists, the best engineers, the best researchers, the best universities, whether it's in stores at the University of Connecticut or Cleveland at Case Western or Dayton or Cincinnati. We have the best universities, the best researchers, but too often we do the innovation, we do the discovery, we do the experimentation that leads to products, and then we offshore and make the products there. Let me give you an example about why that doesn't work and what does work. There's a small community in Ohio, Minster, Ohio. It's not far from Wapakoneta, Neil Armstrong's hometown, the first man that walked on the moon, and just north of Dayton. And it's in Auglaize County where I visited some time ago. It's the largest yogurt manufacturer in North America. And when I went in there, they had just made it more efficient. In the past, their supplier had delivered little plastic cups to this yogurt manufacturer. You go into the plant, they had these big silver vats of fermented milk with yogurt, and they'd squirt this yogurt into these plastic cups, seal it, and package it. A young engineer, a young industrial engineer, and a couple of people that had worked on the line for a decade or so had said we can do this better. And instead of bringing the plastic cups in from a supplier, they simply did something. They did something simple for an engineer, not so simple for me. They took plastic rolls and they fed a plastic sheet into a machine that was about, the whole assembly line was maybe 80 feet long, and the plastic would be heated and then extruded and then cooled slowly, and the yogurt would be squirted into the plastic cup and sealed and sent. Now, the innovation took place on the shop floor. And that's what happens when you develop a product, and wherever you manufacture it, the innovation, the product innovation and the process innovation. The process innovation meaning how you make it, the process of making it as they did Dannon yogurt, and packaging, and the actual improvement of the product takes place on the shop floor. That's why this is so important. And this legislation, our Revitalize American Manufacturing Innovation Act of 2013 creates a network for manufacturing innovation, would position the U.S. as the world's leader. We've already done something like this in Youngstown, Ohio. First in the country, mentioned by the President in the President's State of the Union message. First ever National Additive Manufacturing Innovation Institute. It's called America Makes, and it's in conjunction with the University of Missouri, in conjunction with businesses and universities, Eastern Gateway in Youngstown State in the Mahoning Valley, University of Pittsburgh, and sort of this tech belt along there. And they do something called 3D printing, which is kind of hard to conceptualize until you see it, but it really is something to look for in the future. And we know how to make things in this country. We have seen with some federal funding matched by $40 million of private funds, it's making Youngstown a world leader in 3D manufacturing technology already. We need to build on this momentum. That's why our legislation is so important. It's supported by manufacturing associations, the semiconductor groups. We've seen other countries begin to sort of mimic it and parrot it and imitate it. And we know that we have something here that will help America lead the world. And think of it, Mr. President, in concluding before yielding to the senator from Oregon, think of this in terms of a teaching hospital where you have a great teaching hospital at the University of Cincinnati or Ohio State. Or Case in Cleveland or the University of Toledo, and these teaching hospitals where research and development and innovation are happening with great scientists and great doctors and great researchers, and often what they produce, what they come up with is commercialized locally, and you build a critical mass in that field in some kind of scientific medical field. You build that expertise in that region. That's what we want to do with these manufacturing hubs like Youngstown, like NAMI in Youngstown, where Youngstown, we will see all kinds of job creation coming out of this that will make Youngstown the vital city that it's been in much of its history, and we want to see it become in the future. It's good for our country. It's good for manufacturing. It's good for families that get their living, that earn their living from manufacturing. And it will be particularly good for our communities. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Oregon.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask to speak for up to 10 minutes, as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also ask unanimous consent for my intern, Bruce Lehman, to have privileges of the floor for the balance of the day.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. I rise, Mr. President, to address an issue that should be of concern to all Americans, and that is the advice and consent function of the U.S. Senate regarding nominations. This is the critical check envisioned by our founders in which the President has the power to nominate for the executive branch positions and for judicial nominees, and then the Senate is held responsible to provide a check to make sure there are not outrageous nominees that are placed in positions, and that is the advice and consent function, which throughout our history has basically been a simple majority function with very rare exception. Now, this issue comes up at this moment because 2 weeks ago, the minority of this body on the Senate would not allow there to be a vote on whether or not to confirm Mel Watt. They did that by preventing there being enough votes to close debate. So that blockade was basically put in place without respecting, if you will, the fact that Mel Watt is highly qualified for his position at the Federal Housing Finance Agency, the position he would hold, and giving the entire Senate the ability to weigh in about whether or not they agreed with that judgment, the judgment of the President, that Mel Watt was well qualified. And in the same week, this body also blocked an up-and-down vote on Patricia Millett, who was a nominee for the D.C. Circuit Court. And in this occasion, it wasn't because folks said that she wasn't qualified. They said instead, we don't want to put any more of President Obama's nominees onto the D.C. Circuit Court because we want it to be dominated by the judges who were confirmed when President Bush was president. And then just yesterday, this pattern of blockading up and down votes on nominees continued, with the minority filibustering, blocking the closing of debate on Cornelia Pillard. And again, highly qualified individual. The argument wasn't made that there was some exceptional circumstance in her background that left her unprepared for this position. The argument was simply made, we don't want to let the president put any judges on this D.C. Circuit Court. Well, that's extreme concern, and I must say that it has caused folks who have been scholars in this area to look at it. Norm Ornstein of the American Enterprise Institute basically said that's ridiculous for the minority to block up and down votes, not on the basis that there's something wrong with their qualifications, but just because they want to take away the president's ability and constitutional responsibility to nominate individuals to fill vacancies. So this obstruction exercised over the last, almost 5 years now has done significant damage to the court. It's done significant damage to the executive branch. It prevents qualified nominees to get an opportunity to have a vote on this floor so that they can, if they receive a simple majority vote of support, so that they can go to work on behalf of the American people, either in their executive branch capacity or addressing the huge backload in our judicial system. The U.S. Senate has this advice and consent role, which is a treasured responsibility. It's a weighty responsibility. And I think everyone in this body, I think all 100 senators could agree that under advice and consent, the Senate must exercise a significant check on the quality of presidential nominees, whether for the courts or for the executive branch. The Senate should vet nominees. The committees that are related to the particular positions should explore their background. They should hold a hearing. They should ask tough questions. They should debate the nominees. And then, once recommended on the floor of the Senate, we should continue that vetting and debating process. And then, having shared our insights on their background, we need to vote to confirm or reject. It should be on very rare exception when there are extraordinary circumstances that make someone unworthy that they should be blocked from having a final vote. Advice and consent must not become block and destroy. But advice and consent has become block and destroy, and the Senate nomination process is broken. A minority of one branch of government, the Senate, should not be able to systematically undermine the other two branches of government. Yet that is what we see today. President Obama's district court nominees have waited, on average, more than twice as long as President George Bush's nominees to be confirmed by the Senate after being reported out of committee. So we have the challenge of getting up and down votes. We also have basically a process of dragging feet in order to make it more difficult to actually get to the votes on these individuals in the first place. For the circuit courts, that comparison is even worse. President Obama's nominees have waited 3.5 times longer than the nominees of his predecessor, 3.5 times longer. The Congressional Research Service notes that of the last 5 presidents, President Obama is the only one to have his district and circuit court nominees wait, on average, more than 6 months for confirmation. So these delays, in combination with ultimately denying the possibility to hold an up or down vote, to hold a final vote on whether to confirm or not confirm, they constitute a systematic undermining of the function of the other two branches of government. Now, this was not envisioned in any possible way by the crafters of our Constitution. They argued there should be three co-equal branches. But this outcome, in which the Senate minority seeks to undermine an executive branch, is inconsistent with the constitutional design of co-equal branches. They are not co-equal if one branch can systematically undermine another. And in regard to the courts, this outcome in which the Senate minority is seeking to ideologically pack the courts by having insisted on up or down votes for President Bush's nominees and then blocking up and down votes on President Obama's nominees, it politicizes our judicial system. It undermines the integrity of our court system. Now, the Senate has confronted this abuse of advice and consent 3 times in recent history. In 2005, the Democratic minority was blocking up and down votes on a series of President Bush's nominees. They were doing the same thing that we see today. And a gang of 14 gathered together to debate this because essentially the Republican majority said, if you don't quit blocking up and down votes on the president's nominees, we're going to change the rules and make it a simple majority. And out of this gang of 14 came a deal. And the deal was that the Democrats would, except under exceptional circumstances, not block a nominee, and the counterpoint being that the Republicans would not change the rules. So they got what they wanted, which was up and down votes without a rule change. Well, that pledge that the Democrats made was honored, and subsequent nominees got their up and down votes. Now, in January of this year, the Democrats, in the reversal of positions, insisted that the Republican minority quit blocking up and down votes on President Obama's nominees. Kind of a deja vu moment, only the two parties were reversed. And out of that conversation, out of that dialogue in January, came a promise from the Republican minority leader of this body. And he promised a return to the norms and traditions of the U.S. Senate regarding nominations. And what are those norms and traditions? Those norms and traditions are simple up and down votes with rare exception. But that promise was barely made. Within weeks it was broken when we saw the first ever filibuster of a defense secretary nominee. It just so happened, ironically, that the Republican filibuster, first time in history of a defense nominee, was against one of their former colleagues, Republican colleagues, Chuck Hagel. So the January promise was broken. This led to increasing tensions until July of this year, when Democratic and Republican members met in the old Senate chambers to privately share their concerns, and a new deal was hammered out, which is essentially that the executive nominees would get up and down votes. And that happened for a significant list of nominees. An up and down vote on Richard Cordray to be head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Gina McCarthy to head the EPA, nominees to fill the National Labor Relations Board, nominee to head the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, nominee to head the Ex-Im Bank, and shortly following thereafter, a nominee to be the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Samantha Powers. And so that July deal held through a list of nominees until 2 weeks ago. And 2 weeks ago, this body blocked an up or down vote on Mel Watt. So we're right back where we were before. Right back where we were. The promise made in January shattered, the promise made in July shattered, and the ability of this body to do its advice and consent responsibility shattered. This should be deeply troubling to all. And we must restore the ability of the Senate to perform its responsibilities under the Constitution to advise and consent. The Senate, with simple up and down votes, will be a check on bad nominations by the President. I have voted against at least one of the President's nominees. I was prepared to vote against another. Here just a few weeks ago, the President withdrew that nominee, so that vote wasn't necessary. But that was related to a judgment of the qualifications of an individual and whether they were a good fit for a particular position. It wasn't about trying to systematically undermine the executive branch and keep them from operating. That's essentially why we have up and down votes, is a check on unqualified individuals or a poor fit for a particular position. So in this area, in both the Senate failure to do its job vis-a-vis judicial nominees and to do its job vis-a-vis executive nominees, we have created unequal branches of government. It is time, Mr. President, to fix the broken Senate in regard to nominations. It is time, Mr. President, to restore the traditional role of the Senate in evaluating nominations so that with nominees who are confirmed, they can go to work in the courts, go to work in the executive branch to do the work that the citizens of the United States of America expect them to do on behalf of our nation. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor. Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.